morning, everyone. Welcome to the online learning channel. My name is Brad, and I'll be assisting you today with English, specifically focusing on the grade 12 curriculum. And when it comes to the curriculum, the aspect of English that we're going to be looking at today refers to writing and presenting, specifically looking at the idea of not only comprehension, but also the idea of summaries. Okay, so without further ado, I'd just like to share with you a PowerPoint slide presentation that's just going to guide us, in our conversations with regards to how it is that we take on comprehensions and the likes of summaries. Okay, so as mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the aspect of English known as writing and presenting, specifically looking at the idea of a comprehension, also looking at the idea of a summary. And then when it comes to language structures and conventions, we won't necessarily be focusing on this in today's presentation, but we certainly will do so in presentations to follow. Okay, so now when it comes to comprehensions, generally there are three types of questions that you could typically come across. First and foremost, you may come across a general comprehension. You may then come across a comprehension that is focusing on vocabulary. And then you may look at a comprehension that is quite technical in its nature and the questions thereafter. Okay, so just a quick tip with regards to taking on this particular, say, paper. This is typically, an English home paper language that you'll come across when faced with these comprehension-like and summary-like questions. So section A, I would strongly suggest that you dedicate 50 minutes to this particular section. This is the comprehension section. Section B, I would strongly suggest you dedicate about 30 minutes. This is the summary section. And then section C, the language structures and convention section, I would dedicate a little bit more time than you did in section B. I would then bump that up to 40 minutes. Okay, so when it comes to today's presentation, we're going to be focusing on comprehension, specifically focusing on reading for understanding and meaning. Okay, so the comprehension that we have for you today is a comprehension that focuses on a particular topic that is certainly quite relevant in today's society, and that is the topic of social media and how it is that social media is becoming a toxic mirror. Okay, so the title of this particular comprehension, how social media is a toxic mirror. Okay, so as you would have noticed, the comprehension is before us. So without further ado, let us then go through the actual comprehension. So we've long understood that movies, magazines, and television damage teens' body image by enforcing a thin ideal. Lesser known is the impact of social media on body confidence. With the rapid aging down of smartphone ownership, most parents spend digital parenting time on character coaching, making sure their kids think before they post comments and refrain from things like cyberbullying. For at least a decade, educators like me have argued that social media's biggest threat was its likeness to a bathroom wall, letting teens sling insults with the recklessness that comes with anonymity. So not anymore. Social media has also become a toxic mirror. Earlier this year, psychologists found robust cross-cultural evidence linking social media use to body image concerns, dieting, body surveillance, a drive for thinness, and self-objectification in adolescence. Note, that doesn't mean social media caused the problems, but there's a strong association between them. So visual platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat deliver the tools that allow teens to earn approval for their appearance and compare themselves to others. The most vulnerable users, researchers say, are the ones who spend most of their time posting, commenting on, and comparing themselves to photos. One study found that female college students who did this on Facebook were more likely to link their self-worth to their looks. Interestingly, while girls report more body image disturbance and disordered eating than boys, studies have shown that members of both genders can be equally damaged by social media. And thanks to an array of free public applications, selfie holics now have the power to alter images of their bodies in pictures in a way that's practically on par with applying makeup and other beauty products. If the internet has been called a great democratizer, perhaps what social media have done is let anyone into the beauty pageant. Teens cover up pimples, whiten their teeth, and even airbrush with the swipe of a finger, curating their own image to become a prettier, thinner, and hotter self. So all this provides an illusion of control. If I spend more time on and really work at improving myself, I can be beautiful. I don't get to choose how I'm going to leave my apartment today. One young woman told me if I could, my body would look different, but I can choose which picture makes my arms look thinner. But invariably, the line between a like and feeling valued becomes blurred. I think it affects teens subconsciously, just seeing how many likes they get and how much attention they get just for how they look, one 16-year-old told me. What teens share online is dwarfed by what they consume. Pre-internet, you had to hoof it to the grocery store to find a magazine with celebrity bodies, or at least filch your mother's copy from the bathroom. Now the pictures are as endless as they are available. Teens can spend hours fixating on the toned arms or glutes of celebrities who hawk their bodies as much as their talent. So the meteoric rise of the wellness industry online has launched an entire industry of fitness celebrities on social media. Oh, excuse me. Millions of followers embrace their regimes and for purposes for diet and exercise, but increasingly the drive for wellness and clean eating has become stealthy cover for more dieting and deprivation. This year, an analysis of 50 so-called Fitspiration websites revealed messaging that was indistinguishable at times from pro-anorexia or pro-ana or thinspiration websites. Both contained strong language inducing guilt about weight or the body and promoted dieting, restraint, and fat and weight stigmatization. Writing in Vice, 24-year-old Ruby Tando recounted how a focus on healthy and clean eating and lifestyle enabled her to hide her increasingly disordered eating and deflect concerned peers. I had found wellness, she wrote. I was not well. Many teens are media literate about movies and magazines. They take in digitally altered images with a critical eye. Less clear is how social media literate they are. The older adolescents I work with often shrug off conversations about the perils of social media with a duh or I know that already. That doesn't mean that they're not listening or feeling worried that their bodies don't measure up. Besides, this population is hardly famous for gushing gratitude for parental advice. So what can parents do? Ask teens their opinion of the ways people modify their own appearance online. Why do people do it? Why do they gain? What do they gain and from whom? Sometimes just naming a feeling as normal can make a young adult feel less alone. It never hurts to tell teens that they matter more than their looks. As they peer into the mirror on the screen, a good old-fashioned "I love you exactly as you are" may be more timely than ever. Okay, so just a little glossary there. Filch refers to steal something, especially small, something small and not very valuable. Glutes refer to a specific muscle group. Okay, so students must be encouraged to read, tune into the news channels, generally keep up to date when it comes to current affairs, certainly when it comes to just being able to tackle comprehension-like questions and comprehensions themselves, because often will be the case that the comprehension will refer to a particular aspect of society that is pretty pertinent. So without further ado, let's get topical. Okay, so now the questions that are asked of us in reference to text A. The first question is asking, what do you understand by the expression aging down of smartphone ownership? Okay, so the aging down of smartphone ownership, what do you understand by that? Okay, so younger children now own smartphones. That's the reality of the matter. Children are now getting access to smartphones at an earlier and earlier age, and this is the reference that typically refers to aging down of smartphones. Okay, so explain what the writer means by teens sling insults with the recklessness that comes only with anonymity. Okay, so this is line 7 to 8. Okay, so in terms of teenagers, the teenagers have a false sense of bravado and they do not feel responsible for what they say or post. They feel invincible because of the anonymity of social media. Teenagers will say anything on social media because they believe that in their anonymity, there will be no repercussions whatsoever, which is certainly concerning to think. All right, so on to the third question. Now, if you refer to paragraph number 2, what is the effect of the single line paragraph? You'll notice in paragraph number 2, there's a single line paragraph. Okay, so essentially the writer brings in the topic into focus as it highlights the damaging effect of self-obsession which has been brought about by social media. The single line effectively indicates a dramatic change from one aspect of the topic to another. Okay, so from one aspect of the topic to another, a dramatic change. That's the so-called use of the single line paragraph, the reason behind the single use. So if we go into the fourth question, refer to paragraph 4, specifically lines 16 and 17. The most vulnerable users, researchers say, are the ones who spend most of their time posting, commenting on, and comparing themselves to photos. Okay, so if you were to comment on the implication of this sentence in context, what exactly would you say? Right, so those who should avoid exposure actually put themselves in the spotlight, which jeopardizes their already fragile self-esteem. The ones most fragile are the ones who are most affected. Okay, so that's essentially the idea behind the individuals commenting the most, comparing themselves to photos. They are, in fact, the most fragile of all. So if we go into the fifth question, discuss how the diction in paragraph 5 reveals the writer's attitude towards the way social media are used. Okay, so the diction in paragraph 5. How does this reveal the attitude of the author? Okay, so the writer uses a deprecating, the writer's use of deprecating terms such as selfie-holics, democratizer, and curating underscore her aversion to the narcissism and dishonesty that is presented by the range of applications. She is critical of the teenagers' obsession with social media, in a nutshell. She is contemptuous of the illusion of perfection that is afforded by the applications on social media. Okay, so the author clearly quite critical of the use of social media, certainly by the adolescent population. Okay, so if we were to refer then to paragraph number 8, comment on the writer's tone in this particular paragraph. What is the writer's tone in this particular paragraph of the comprehension? Okay, so the writer's tone is critical, satirical, concerned. Teenagers ultimately have an unhealthy obsession with image. So they can spend hours and hours fixating on this idea of image. The writer is of the opinion that teenagers are willing participants who are brainwashed by social media. So this kind of brainwashing activity in the eyes of the writer is what is taking place amongst the teenage population, certainly when it comes to social media. So now if you were to critically discuss whether paragraph 9 supports the actual title of the article. Remember the title of the article, How Social Media is a Toxic Mirror. Okay, so in this sense, paragraph 9 fully supports the idea that social media can be seen as a toxic mirror. The poison, or toxic, spread by social media is responsible for the damage caused to people's health. The writer has established that the wellness industry, which pervades the internet, paradoxically makes people unwell. The claim that wellness is a stealthy cover for unhealthy habits is justified and validated by the factual information provided. So for instance, or for example, the analysis of 50 websites, as mentioned in the actual comprehension, is a clear indicator that this so-called stealthy cover utilized by the wellness industry is something that the author is now quite critical of. Okay, question number 8. In your opinion, is the final paragraph a suitable conclusion to the article itself? So justify your response with reference to the text as a whole. Okay, so the final paragraph, is it a suitable conclusion to the article? Does it tie in everything that is ultimately needing to be said? I suppose in many respects, you just need to look at the article as a whole and just tie in your understanding of what the message is at the end of the day and whether or not that final paragraph has in fact achieved its objective. Okay, so you may of course say yes or no, depending on your opinion. Now, if you were to agree that the final paragraph does in fact say tie up everything and summarize the article as a whole, so the conclusion is cautionary and advisory. After the negative concerns raised, the writer gives constructive advice to parents on how to engage with their children in dialogue on their self-image. So the rhetorical questions that the author is now asking allow the reader to reflect, and the conclusion presents the role parents have to take. It allows the reader to reflect, and the conclusion presents the role that parents have to take, which is more comprehensive than their digital parenting, which is now being referred to in paragraph number 1. So as opposed to what's being mentioned in paragraph number 1 with regards to digital parenting, this is a more, say, practical approach that parents can now take, a dialogue that they can engage with their students or with their, say, sons and daughters and whatnot, as to what the dynamics are surrounding self-image. If you were to disagree, though, a good conclusion often gives an answer to the problem posed in the preceding paragraphs. So the conclusion is not a good conclusion because instead of solving the problem of children's self-esteem by giving concrete advice, it often starts off with 4 questions. After the questions, there's only a flimsy piece of advice on offer as to how to deal with the situation. Nothing substantial, nothing, say, concrete in terms of actually offering practical solutions to this issue of self-esteem. So you could argue that yes, it does in fact summarize the article as a whole, the last paragraph, but then you could also argue that it doesn't, in the sense that it doesn't offer too many, say, practical solutions. It's just commenting on the so-called dynamics surrounding self-esteem and all the issues that go along with it. Okay, so now that is the comprehension. So we then move on to the summary section of the paper. So essentially when it comes to providing a summary, you are expected to do so in your own words. It's not necessarily a case of copying and pasting particular lines, particular sentences from the actual articles that you may have read or been asked to summarize. It's a case of now piecing together your thoughts in terms of what your understanding is and essentially presenting it in a nice, concise, and, say, reduced fashion. Okay, so now this particular summary is entitled How to Give Constructive Criticism. Okay, so the task then, of course, would be for you to summarize this particular piece. So let's just go through the actual piece itself so we fully understand. Assertive communication and constructive criticism are important tools in building an empowered team. Laura Kennedy from Wellness says that when communicating with co-workers, clear communication facilitates understanding and solution finding. Assertive communication is not about dominating the situation, but rather allowing for collaboration between employees. Open dialogue must be created so that all employees can participate. Businesses that do not encourage assertive communication often follow a hierarchical system which limits their growth. Everyone should be encouraged to brainstorm to find solutions. Constructive criticism guides people rather than breaking them down. It creates a platform where all possible solutions can be considered. Kennedy says it's more accurate to think of it as effective feedback. Constructive criticism allows for career development. Kennedy says it's better to communicate with someone on a personal level first. Emails do not have the benefit of tone and body language to guide the conversation. Without these non-verbal cues, there is more chance you will be misunderstood and even run the risk of conversation being perceived as a personal attack. To avoid one-sided dominance, go into each communication with an understanding of your goal and an open mind about how to get there. This includes understanding the context in which the communication occurs. During the conversation, be decisive rather than uncertain. If you think and talk about yourself positively, it creates an impression of credibility. When starting a conversation, be careful of being accusatory. You need to talk about the behavior that is problematic, not the person. This requires you to get into a meeting with all the facts. There's a debate over whether or not to include emotion when addressing an issue. Kennedy says it's impossible to leave it out, as emotion often drives the most decisive decisions. Afterwards, draw up clear points about what was discussed and what is expected. This clarifies understanding and minimizes confusion. Clear communication paths reduce frustration, allow teams to work more effectively to reach their goals, and to allow for higher engagement. Conflict is reduced when there is a focus on facts. Okay, so now with regards to this particular text, it's essentially asking us to summarize in our own words the text itself. So in terms of summarizing in your own words, this provides a discussion on assertive communication. Summarize in your own words the aspects of constructive criticism that facilitate effective communication. Okay, so this is the task that is now being asked of you. Summarize in your own words the aspects of constructive criticism that facilitate effective communication. So important notes worth mentioning, your summary should include 7 points and not exceed 90 words. So that may sound quite difficult at first, but you'll be surprised as to how, how effective you can actually bring about a summary if you really focus on what's important versus what is considered to be less important. You must write a fluent paragraph. You are not required to include a title for the summary. You are to indicate your word count at the end of the summary. So this may, of course, be asked of you. This may not. I tend to shy away from word count because it often wastes time in terms of the actual learner fixating themselves on how many words they've written, as opposed to the quality and the actual, say, nature of the paragraph itself. Okay, so in terms of making use of the following points, you should include the following as a guideline. Any 7 valid points are to be credited in paragraph form. Okay, so what I've done here is I've put together a table that essentially divides what is considered quotations on one side of the actual table versus points on the other side of the table. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken a quotation from the summary or from the actual piece, and then I've almost indicated it in my own words, so as to bring about that sense of summary. So the first quote, assertive communication is not about dominating a situation, but rather allowing for collaboration between employees. Open dialogue must be created so that all employees can participate. Okay, so that's a direct quote. The points that I have offered as a summary, assertive communication allows for open discussion and cooperation. Done. That is essentially the nature of this particular quote. That's effectively the message that we get at the end of the day. Second quote, everyone should be encouraged to brainstorm to find solutions, creates a platform where all possible solutions can be considered. Summary, everyone should be encouraged to participate in finding solutions. Third point, constructive criticism guides people rather than breaking them down. It's more accurate to think of it as effective feedback. Summary, people are given direction when constructive criticism is given, and this allows for growth. Straightforward. Okay, next quote. It is better to communicate with someone on a personal level first. Okay, so that's the quote, the fourth quote. The summary, a personal approach initially is important. Okay, keeps it open-ended, but still at the same time really drives the point home. Fifth quotation, to avoid one-sided dominance, go into each communication with an understanding of your goal, an open mind about how to get there. Right? Summary, always have an objective in mind and consider alternative perspectives. Again, just breaking that quote down, word for word, and offering essentially a nice, concise, summarized version. Quotation number 6. This includes understanding the context in which the communication occurs. This requires you to get into a meeting with all the facts. Conflict is reduced when there is a focus on facts. Okay, the summary. Be aware of the context, facts before embarking on a discussion. Okay, so be aware of the context / facts before embarking on a discussion. Because as it is indicated in the quote, this requires you to get into a meeting with all the facts, and it allows conflict to be reduced when there's a focus on the facts. Okay, 7th quote. During the conversation, be decisive rather than uncertain. If you think and talk about yourself positively, it creates an impression of credibility. Summary. Being assertive adds value to the impression made on others. Straightforward. 8th quote. When starting a conversation, be careful of being accusatory. You need to talk about the behavior that is problematic, not the person. Summary. The issue should be the focus point in the conversation without it being personal and emotional. Very, very important point to make, especially when it comes to developing relationships in a working environment, not necessarily personal, not necessarily emotional, also focusing on the conversation and the issue at hand in a way that brings about productivity. Afterwards, draw up clear points about what was discussed and what is expected. This clarifies understanding and minimizes any form of confusion. Summary, a systematic approach will obviate misunderstanding between parties. A systematic approach will obviate misunderstanding between parties. Okay, so you've drawn up the clear points of what was discussed, you clarify that everyone has understood, you minimize confusion at all costs, and the way that you do that is that you go about it in a systematic way and you eliminate all forms of misunderstanding between parties so as to move forward and make progress. Okay, so if we were then to now produce the final product of these summaries based on the quotations identified in a paragraph form, this is essentially what we would have. Okay, so now you must note that this is merely an example. It's not necessarily prescriptive, and ultimately you must look at it in a way that would suggest that it's not necessarily a straightforward memorandum, but perhaps just a take or a personal take on what exactly was identified in the summary, certainly when it came to the quotes and how it is that those quotes were then, say, just taken down a notch and summarized further. So here we go. Assertive communication allows for open discussion, and everyone should be encouraged to participate in finding solutions. In this way, people are given direction and opportunities for growth. While it is important to have a personal approach, an objective must always be borne in mind, and alternative perspectives must be considered. This means that the contextual facts must be ascertained prior to any discussion. Being assertive is an invaluable attribute. Furthermore, the issue should be the focus without being personal and emotional. This systematic approach will obviate misunderstanding between parties. And as indicated in the instructions, it did ask us to provide a word count, and in this particular case, we have no less than 85 words. Okay, so just a quick indication then as to how exactly the examiner would mark this particular piece. So mark allocations, 7 marks for 7 points, 3 marks for language, which would total then 10 marks. Distribution of language marks when candidate has not quoted verbatimly, 1 to 3 points correct, 1 mark awarded, 4 to 5, 2 marks, 6 to 7, 3 marks. Distribution of language marks when candidate has quoted verbatimly, 6 to 7 quotations, award no language mark, 1 to 5 quotations, award 1 language mark. Okay, word count, markers are required to verify the number of words used. They do not deduct any marks if the candidate fails to indicate the number of words used or if the number of words used is indicated incorrectly. If the word limit is exceeded, read up to the last sentence above the stipulated upper limit and ignore the rest of the summary. Okay, so as I said earlier, my personal opinion may be different from what the examiner is expecting of you. just make sure that you read the instructions and you understand what is required of you. All right, so I trust that you enjoyed today's presentation. We looked at the aspect of English known as writing and presenting, specifically focusing on comprehension and summary, and looking at that idea of how it is that we understand comprehensions. A lot of it does boil down to being aware of current affairs and just being in tune with certain, say, issues that are presenting themselves in society. That's why it's important to keep up to date with these things. And then when it came to summary, it was more about just looking at a particular piece and just trying to deconstruct it as best we could in a way that offered a nice, concise, draft version of what we felt was ultimately a summary of that particular item. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's online learning channel presentation. My name is Brad, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.